Hey guys, welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight, I'm going to share a video that has a lot of information relative to my own experiences with my drinking and some of the things, the poor decision making that I made. But I want to have a video to have you consider DUI and the risks that we take, and really think through it here while we're hopefully all in a sober state before the next time you want to get behind the wheel. Now we have all these driver's impact panels, and we have a lot of videos. We all know that we're not supposed to drink and drive, but there are decisions that we make right before we do it that are not clear and not wise. I have 3 of them, and I'm now at a point in my life where after 7 years from my last one, where I can actually submit for my license. Now this file right here represents some of the supporting documentation that I need to do to submit to New York State, and we'll finally be submitting that on next Monday. Now that having said that, doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to get my license here in New York, but it is my submission. It's at a point right now where I can, and I've had 2 months worth of demonstrated urine screens and things like that. These are all things that they require to show proof that I'm in good standing relative to all that stuff before they even consider putting me back behind the wheel, which I think is prudent. I'm glad that I get a shot to do it, and I'm going to go down that road. However, there's a lot that I've learned through this season, and honestly through the mistakes that I've made in the past, and I'd like to share some of those things with you tonight. I'm going to start off with a video here and just give you a sense of the impact of some of this stuff. So we'll start right out of the gate here with the first video I have for you.
Tonight of a terrifying crash that sent a car flying. It happened Saturday in Eau Claire. In the slowdown recording,
I want to notice this car is driving on an empty 3-lane highway. Well, actually 6-lane highway, but in 3 open lanes for no reason. I'll just turn right to the right in the middle of nowhere, or in the middle of really nothing going on, nothing to avoid. This just happened.
You could see the car cross a grass median and slam into another. It happened Saturday in Eau Claire.
Figure is, if you look
it
here,
happened Saturday in Eau.
Oops.
6 years ago, I had it all.
New video tonight of a terrifying crash that sent a car
So look, it looks to me like they just kind of overshot the
flying. It happened Saturday in Eau Claire. In the slowdown recording, you could see the car cross a grass median and slam into another car that was waiting at a stoplight. Both cars flipped into a parking lot. Police say that the driver was drunk at 9:30 in the morning. Somehow, no one was seriously hurt.
So that's the first one. So that's 9:30 in the morning, drunk. Looks like they missed the exit. Wasn't real clear to me on the first one, but now you know. So that's that one. Second one gives a little bit more sense of the risk associated with it. And I'm showing these videos really for one purpose, just to let's couch this in reality. There's no point in just speculating about it. Let's look at what people are really doing to mess things up for themselves.
If you were tuning in just minutes ago here on our show, we spoke live with our Fox 29 Philadelphia reporter Kelly Rule outside of a police station, as we did learn that a woman has been arrested for driving under the influence and killing 2 state troopers and a civilian out there. Here is a closer look in the nuts and bolts of what we know this morning.
Photo of 21-year-old Jayana Tanae Webb, charged with multiple felony counts of murder in the 3rd degree, homicide by motor vehicle while under the influence, and manslaughter in the deaths of Pennsylvania State Troopers Martin Mack, Brandon.
In this case, it's state troopers. So you can imagine killing law enforcement, how much more they're going to go after you.
Siska, and a pedestrian. The crash happened Monday around 1 o'clock in the morning on I-95 South near the stadiums.
Janet, did you drink that night?
Earlier today, Webb was escorted out of Troop K, wearing the handcuffs of the troopers she allegedly hit and killed while under the influence, with a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit, according to sources.
How much had you had to drink that night?
A Twitter page with the handle today_J.
Hear the antagonism and that type of thing. She's already obviously feeling this. If she's a serious alcoholic, then at this point in time, she may even be going through some withdrawal. I'm not trying to be sympathetic for the choices she made in the life she took, but these are some impacts that we have.
Includes a post from January that reads, quote, "If you ask me, I'm the best drunk driver ever. Sources confirm investigators are looking into her social media. Social media accounts also include posts promoting her small hairstyling business and appear to highlight her past as a Norristown High School graduate and competitive track and field athlete.
So, you know, obviously if that's the best drunk driver ever, yeah, I'm not even going to make a joke about it. It's pretty ridiculous. So, you know, that's that invincibility that we have. I mean, closer than it appears. You know, that high risk living clearly cost her. I don't know where that played out, and I guess we'll investigate what the final sentencing was in that, but I'm sure it's pretty heavy. So we see these two videos just to really couch drunk driving and realize it's an illogical thing, and you don't have control of the vehicle. There's no chance to me that in my mind, I would think that at 1 o'clock in the morning that person went out, got in the car, and decided to kill 2 state troopers and a civilian drinking. Just as so as a person at 9 o'clock in the morning is probably not really thinking about it on an empty road, just missed the turn, but probably thought they were navigating just fine because it was a low risk situation in their assessment. Obviously, it was not. You know, why must we drive drunk? I guess the question that I would ponder. You know, why do we find the need to do it with Uber being everywhere now, and the knowledge of it and the prevalence of it and the promotability of or the promotion of how we should not be doing that? Why do we do it? Well, a few things I considered is, you know, some people, the cost of Uber. Now, somebody said, would you want one more drink? And they had 20 bucks in their pocket. They're going to spend every bit of that $20 on more of a drink. But if that 10 of that 20 is going to get you home in an Uber, for some reason, we're resistant to that in our intoxicated state. But Uber, and I'm not saying the expensive cost of an Uber. I'm just saying that there's a cost to an Uber we resist. We also, I think back to my drinking, Uber wasn't as prevalent with when I had my stuff going on. But, you know, I contemplate all the hassle. You know, that's why I don't get another ride, because there's just so much hassle to go back and get my car in the morning and all this other stuff like that. And that's what you're thinking about it before anything falls apart. You know, because you're at that point assuming that you're going to get home without any issue whatsoever. You know, I guess that plays into the second element is convenience. You know, it's just quite honestly, it's inconvenient to have somebody give you a ride home, figure out all that stuff, get home. Then you got to get up in the morning and figure out where your car is and all this other stuff like that. And it's just, there's a convenience thing that we play out in our head while we're still drinking. You know, another one is pride. You know, this individual that just hit those troopers obviously had a pride issue. She thought she's the best drunk driver ever. Obviously, if she's the best, nobody should be drunk driving because of what happened with her. But I play on that a little bit tongue in cheek, and the fact to say that nobody's a good drunk driver. Just if you think you are, then probably you're just really been doing it so much that you just didn't have anything happen, so you think you're good at it. But it doesn't mean you are good at it. So pride would be a big factor of it. Some of it's just stubborn. You know, I was a bouncer at several bars throughout my time, and I can't tell you how many times it was just dealing with people just unbelievably stubborn when you're intoxicated. I mean, just forget about driving. I mean, I can recall so many times trying to get people out of our bar through conversation that always ended up in a nonsense. I remember one time it was Cinco de Mayo, and we had a gentleman in there that was taking people's drinks and was so intoxicated he was falling into the speakers. So, you know, he was bad. We'd already asked him to please, you know, calm down a little bit earlier in the night. And then we noticed that he was still taking drinks. So at that point, it was time for him to leave. And my other guys were occupied, so it was just me and him. And just so stubborn. He was not hearing that all those warnings led to the point that his night was going to be over at our facility. And in this case, thank God he was much smaller than me because he got resistant to it. And I grabbed his hoodie and tucked it down the back of his hood and grabbed him by the back of his belt buckle and made it so he didn't really have all that good attraction, and kind of tossed him out the front door of the place I was working because he just was being so friggin' stubborn. But, you know, that's what we do when we're driving too, is we still want to be in control of our night. We still want to be in control of our situation. So we're not going to listen to what anybody else has to say, because for whatever reason in our mind, we feel like we've got a good answer here. You know, and then there's just the good old too drunk to make good choices. You know, our reality has skewed. And I've talked about in the show, you know, whatever I went into drinking, that's what I was going to be for the whole night. And I think that's a lot of us. Honestly, you know, we come in, if I was joking, I was, you know, stand-up comedian. If I was mad, I was going to fight everybody in the bar. If I was feeling a little bit like I wanted to be around a female population, I probably could have repopulated the entire city. You know, I mean, we go into drinking and it overstates who we are, or if we're in a depressed state, it really plows us into the ground. And, you know, I think there's a lot of DWI and DUI type stuff that turns into just, you know, too drunk to make a good choice. So in those cases, we have to have a plan beforehand, realizing that we're high-risk individuals and that our alcohol makes us make bad choices. So if that's something that you do, you should have a plan up front, knowing that's you. Be honest with yourself well before that and make sure that you don't put yourself at risk, because once you're drinking, you're going to make a terrible decision. One thing I want us to understand is that how far you've got to travel is another one that we factor in. I only got to go up the road. Well, I know of a recent DWI that happened within 5 minutes of the house. I had one, my first one happened within 5 minutes of the bar I was at. I took a left. I should have gone right to go home, but I went left for a personal reason. And when I turned left, I was 5 minutes up the road and I got my DWI. Now that one, I was texting. I actually was going to a jiu-jitsu tournament the next morning, and I was texting one of my teammates, and obviously drunk and texting, it just wasn't really working out for me. And I got noticed by another vehicle and I got pulled over and got arrested for DWI. So, distance is not something we should even consider as being, a viable reason, but it is one of the reasons why we drive. I want you to think about something when it comes to a DWI arrest. So I get in a fist fight somewhere, they're going to take care of me and they're going to put me away. But it's not going to be headlines, and nobody's going to get voted into office because of my fist fight that got me arrested. Petty larceny, those types of things, just run-of-the-mill arrests, I guess you should say. Even, burglaries don't really get people elected for office. In my county, DWI convictions get you elected into office. What's weird is the county that I live in, which is one of the most stringent counties in the entire state for DWI, I've never had a DWI in this county. Never. I've had them in 3 other counties. I've been arrested in 4 counties for felony charges, but I've never had a DWI arrest in the county that I've lived in my entire life, except for as a kid. So it's just interesting to me. When you think about DWI, this is something that officials get elected for. So if they're prosecuting you on it, you're really going to have an uphill battle. So think about that. It makes it very public. I think about a lot of DWI. My stuff was always at night, but you think about DWIs that happen, period. If you're in a populated area, everybody's watching you when you go by as you're standing on the side of the road doing the field sobriety test. It's a very embarrassing thing above and beyond all that stuff. Just the arrest alone is a scene. It's a spectacle. Forget if you'd run over anybody or not. You get pulled over, even if it's just barely over the legal limit, and you're not obviously intoxicated. They just smelled it on your breath. We had probable cause to pull you over. It's a spectacle. Even if you get off, it's a spectacle with going through all that stuff. So consider the fact it's a very public display. Afterwards, if you get convicted of one, it's a constant walk of shame. I mean, for 7 years now, I've been either walking, Ubering, or getting rides where I can. 7 friggin' years. I told a story on here. If you guys looked at TikTok, I have a story that I had done in 2019. I was videotaping my feet walking. And in fact, one of these days I'll do a video. I've got some of the shoes I wore right next to me just as an illustration of my time past. But, I was on that walk, and a sponsor from my home group had driven by, and he was with one of his sponsees and looked over. It was in the snow. I was walking through, just doing what I was supposed to do. I wasn't drinking nothing. I was actually doing well and on my way to better days. And he pointed over and said, you don't want to be like that guy. So even in a circumstance where I'm in a recovery community, you're still shamed in a lot of ways. Man, is it expensive. I don't know what it's like in your state, but New York State is expensive to get a DWI, especially if it costs you employment, but primarily just to get one. Now I'm 3 into them, and the amount of money I've spent just on defending it, paying fines and everything else, forget about lost wages, lost opportunities, all that other stuff. The other thing too is that we have entire missed seasons of life. So there's a period of time, especially if you get multiples, that you're going to miss out on so freaking much, especially with kids, because you just can't get to where you got to go. They can't participate in things that they could have otherwise participated in because of transportation. It really is a life inhibitor beyond the fact if nothing very serious happens. But then you got to ask yourself, some very serious questions. What if you kill somebody like this one a female did here? And I've done another video on a pro football player that lost his career because of it in his rookie year. If you kill somebody, it's tragic for everybody involved. But for you, the living, you've got multiple things to consider. I mean, first of all, the sentences on killing somebody is fairly heavy. I mean, it's probably not heavy enough, but I've known somebody that was popping up over a knoll, and there was a car accident there, and the 6 people stay on the road, and he killed a bunch of people by hitting them like bowling pins, basically. And he was on a back road trying to just get home, but he'd had too much to drink, and he hit these people and killed them and spent 8 years in prison for it. What if you lose your kids? If this becomes, if you have your kids in the car in this state, man, or in this county, for sure, you got your hands full. I mean, it's beatable if it's like a first offense or something like that. But chances are most people, by the time they get to that level, they've got other charges on their plate. What's the impact on the kids? What's the impact on you? These things are usually well publicized in the papers, so you got a name for yourself on that stuff on DWIs, period. I know I did. Other thing to consider is future employment. I'm in field sales. It really did impact my future employment opportunities. I was fortunate enough to put my life together and create an environment where I could get good employment, but man, it sure does screw things up. It can cost you, for me, it almost cost me my entire career. Now, it's not uncommon. The national average is about 3% out of 100,000 drivers have a DWI, which is pretty high. I think so anyway, relative to what we're talking about here. Those are people that get arrested, and I don't know if this stat still holds true, but the very first DWI I had to go to some classes for it, and those classes told me that I was likely to get, at that point in time, about 75% likely to get a second DWI within 5 years. They also told me that it took about 300 times of driving drunk before you actually get convicted on average, which for the first one makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably true. And I made it to 6 years, so I just made it beyond that average, but I obviously fell within the average. So we're going to look at some things that talk about really what happens. So currently, there's above a 50% likelihood of getting your second DWI. Now, it's not saying within 5 years. It's just saying there's about even though it's less than about 50% of the time, if you've got one, you're going to get a second one. I'm going to share a couple more things with you guys, and this is more interesting facts relative to DWI. Now, I'm not saying this is where to go get a DWI, so please just, if that's what you're thinking, knock it off. I'm just going to talk to you about, I think I'll blow it up to a bigger screen here. Here you go. All right, so if you look down through here, the top one is the ones that are toughest. So the toughest state on DWI is Arizona. Their legal limit's 0.08. Up to $2,500 fines, 10 days minimum jail time, and ignition, interlock, and license suspension. There's not really, I don't know how they're saying the toughest except for the fine. Utah has the lowest level to consider a DUI, which I think is interesting. They're 0.05, which most of the time here in New York State is a DWI. Driving while intoxicated is 0.08. Driving under the influence is a 0.05. Actually, I think it's driving impaired. That's 0.5. I don't recall. But anyway, either one, they both have sentences with them. One's a misdemeanor. One, actually, the 0.08 is a misdemeanor too, up to a certain point, and then it becomes a felony if you run into somebody or whatever. But I found it interesting. As tough as New York State is, it's still not even in the top 10. Arizona being the toughest. Now, most lenient. The most lenient is Pennsylvania, which really did shock me. Fines are only up to $300. There's no jail time for the first offense. You take a highway school, safety school, when treatment's ordered, or treatment is ordered. So they tell you to get into treatment, which I think is interesting. And South Dakota, DC, Ohio, New Jersey, all those. I'm really surprised. Maryland and Massachusetts, all of them, really surprised that they're in the most lenient. Even North Carolina being in the Bible Belt, it just shocks me that they're most lenient. So these are the ones that are most lenient, and obviously the most penalized. So Arizona being the most penalty ridden, Pennsylvania being the least penalty ridden. When you consider this is all just interesting information, but it's not really necessarily a deterrent. It just tells you that all states have heavy they whether they're lenient or not, there's still an impact on your life relative to driving. And the second DWI gets a lot worse. I think that with the most prevalent DWIs was in Montana. And that in Montana, I believe that they were at, while the national average I said was about a little less than 3%, they're over 4% out of 100,000 drivers. You know, per capita, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Montana are really neck and neck for the most prevalent per capita. Now, the number one arrest state for all DWIs is California, but I think a lot of it has to do with population. Just by nature, you're going to get more arrests for DWI just because there's so many more drivers. But per capita, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Montana are all pretty neck and neck. Depending on the source, you'll get a variation of that story. Now, I've given you a lot of information. I've shared a little bit about my story. I've shared, you know, some of the things that we consider as we go through our decision making while we're drinking to do it in the first place. You understand, you know, some things to consider if you're leveling up the situation. If you actually kill somebody, or if you wreck your car like I did in the third one, you know, the impacts it can have on your employment, your children, your life, your reputation, your wallet, your future, all those things. We know, you know, some states don't take it. Some states take it less seriously than other states, probably just because the laws haven't been passed yet. But I imagine over time, every one of them is going to be pretty heavy. I know New York State certainly is. Knowing this, these are all things that you should consider before you get behind the wheel drinking and driving. Based on my experience, there was not one time that I got behind the wheel drinking and driving was worth all of the impact of it. And what I don't understand is why it is that it took so much for me. So 2010, I got a DWI. I went 6 years where I barely even drank. And then some issues went down in 2015 that I really started drinking again. 2016, it was pouring it on. I got my second DWI. And within 7 months, I had my third. And that was because I was an active, heavy drinking alcoholic. And at that point in time, it wasn't about drinking and driving. It was my whole life was burning down because alcohol had consumed my mind and consumed my soul and consumed my whole life. And so as a byproduct, these DWIs just kind of come out of that. It was the first one, I was partying. The next two, I was living as a drunk. And it just, eventually I was going to get caught no matter what anyway. Now, there are probably many other times I should have been caught just because of the statistics that say how many times you must be driving drunk before you get nailed for the DWI. This is not light. Even though there's a huge prevalence of them happening and you think that you're the one that's not going to get it, I'm telling you, there's not one time I got in the car that I thought I was going to get a DWI, and certainly didn't think I was going to crash my car. It just, I would justify back roads. I would justify it's just a little bit of drinking. But what I forgot is that my tolerance was so high. It just didn't mean, just because I wasn't feeling it, didn't mean that I wasn't incredibly over the legal limit. I had somebody that I know recently, their tolerance level was so stinking high. This person was completely over the legal limit by a long shot and had no appearance of any of it, including almost passed all the field sobriety tests. The only thing that really caused the problem was the fact that there was a breathalyzer taken, and that was the one that really sunk the ship. But all the field sobriety tests seem to be passed as well. I mean, some people, as they say, handle their liquor, but it doesn't mean they can handle a vehicle, because you're going at a much higher rate and a speed, and you got a lot more decisions to make that we clearly are not making correctly. As we saw by that first video of the person at 9 o'clock in the morning missing the entire turn and wiping out a bunch of cars. And that, again, was lucky that nobody was seriously hurt or killed. Now, I'm going to continue probably certain bits of videos on this type of thing, because I want us to start thinking about this and starting to put preventative actions in place before we get to the place that our alcohol has consumed us. And at that place, we think we're going to make decisions. You know, it's oftentimes, you know, you coach kids about, their sexual activities. Boys, you know, you want to have made that decision long before you put yourself in a circumstance. Married men, you want to make that decision and not cheat on your wives long before you put yourself in a situation where there's a very good looking woman in front of you, very interested in you guys are alone in a hotel on a business trip. I mean, that is, you know, you want to make a decision long before that. You'll never even make that decision to ever get to that room or even have that conversation, or you could find yourself in trouble. Very much like that with alcohol. As soon as you start consuming, if you haven't made a decision or have a mitigating plan in place that works for you up front, you can find yourself in the same mess I found myself in. I never one time had a plan to jettison my ability to drink and drive, not one time ever. And I successfully completed 3 DWI arrests and charges and sentencing for them. And the last one more serious than all of them, and that's the one that stuck with me. There was no reductions anymore. There was no anything. I was habitual at it, and they knew it. They were done with me. So that's what I've learned through the DWICs, and I hope this is good information for you as you start to consider yours. I guess the takeaway really is prevention. Make sure that you've got a plan in place to say you're not going to do it, because there's a lot of reasons why we do it. There's a lot of tons of horrible things that can happen if we do it. If nothing's happened to you this time, it means it's more likely it could happen to you the very next time. This is a rolling the dice Russian roulette program. For as long as you've gone with drinking and driving, you haven't got nailed, get ready for the big one. It's like the San Andreas fault. The longer before that sucker has an earthquake, the bigger the earthquake's going to be. That's kind of how I feel the DWI turns into for people's lives. It certainly did with me. Guys, I hope this was beneficial and useful for you. I hope it helps prevent some drinking and driving. I really do. If there's one or two of you out there that are convicted by the message I'm giving you, and you start taking some of these precautionary steps and message here, and do something with it, if you are still somebody that drinks heavily or drinks, not heavily, but occasionally, and is taking these risks, please hear me. Having gone through this is not something to take lightly. It is a complete train wreck for your life when this stuff happens. It really is. There's a lot of embarrassment with it, and there's a lot of things that go along with it, but there's a lot of cost and a lot of risk and a lot of lives at risk every single time you make this choice. I would encourage you strongly to have an exit plan long before you even pick up that first drink, because the first drink, especially if you're an alcoholic, has already altered your thinking, so you're probably not going to be the best to come up with a plan to keep yourself out of trouble. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Put your comments on here if you've got some comments you'd like to add. Share this with somebody you know is high risk, or contemplate this for your own drinking and what you do when you're out. I'm telling you, that $10, $20, $30 Uber was certainly a lot less expensive than $1,900 just for the fine, all kinds of maintenance fees, all kinds of attorney's fees, all kinds of lost wages, towing bills, you name it. The shame, the headlines, standing in court with us. I mean, it just, the volume of things that you go through when you go through is just not worth it. It really isn't for a $30 Uber ride at most. Guys, between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do every single thing I can stay out of trouble. I'm certainly not going to drink and drive, and I hope you do too.